That's real.
Like who's winning the tug of war of where the genesis of Little Brother actually lies?
It's Durham. It's Durham. I mean, it all started at Central. You know what I mean? We were students at North Carolina Central together. So Durham, for all intents and purposes, it is the birthplace of Little Brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just have to make it clear that I'm from Virginia originally. Just
what city?
Alexandria, all through Northern Virginia, but Alexandria and Fairfax specifically.
Okay. All right. So I in the attempts to treat Phonte as a regular guest and not assume that everyone knows his story, I do, however, I'm not that familiar with your story, Pooh. So to give us a recap or whatever, I'll start with you. What was your entry into music?
Probably the radio, but like more importantly, BMG, when they did the you could get like 10 CDs for $1. 12 CDs for $1 or whatever.
Were you honest or were you scammer?
I was scamming big time.
Yeah, proud scammer here.
Yeah, I did it about 5 different times and got 5 different groups of CDs, but that was probably my real intro, just learning about so many different artists. And I had friends from New York. I mean, everybody probably did at that time back in the 90s, who would come down with tapes. Like, that's how I first heard of Biggie, Nas, and just different artists from out of New York at the time. And between that and radio, because radio was real regional in the 90s, so it was heavy go-go influence, but you would get, when the artists come through, you would start getting the different artists. So that's how I got put on to, like, when Raekwon, when he dropped the Purple Tape, he came through, did an interview. They actually debuted Incarcerated Scarfaces on the radio. I'll never forget it, in D.C. So that was my start, man. I was actually just talking about this with my wife yesterday. We didn't listen to music in the house. My mom is not a huge music fan, so I just had to get it other places because it didn't come from the crib.
Yeah, I was going to ask and the same for you, Phonte. Like, was there trickle down creativity in your life, like an older cousin,
Yeah, for me it absolutely was. It was my mom. I think it started with my mom. So the thing with I have very young parents. So my mother when she had me, she was 15 and my dad was 17.
Right.
So I was pretty much with my mom like all the time. So wherever she went, I was there. So during the summer, during the weekends, that was when we had to clean up. We all lived with my grandmother, so that was cleanup time. So that was when she was playing all the, the classic R&B stuff, Luther Patty. You had Johnny Guitar Watson. She used to like Love Jones by Johnny Guitar Watson, and we would sing that. And then during the week, if she went out to like the park or whatever, that's why I heard all like the early 80s, Nucleus, Jam on It, Shannon, Let the Music Play. That was kind of where I was hearing all that. And so between her and my uncle, but 2 uncles, my one uncle Mike, he was a DJ, and he would get like all the promo records from the station and bring them home, and I would go through the promo records. And then my other uncle, my Uncle Brad, he was kind of the more experimental, I guess, in terms of his taste. Like, he was heavy, P-Funk, heavy. He was a big dance music fan, so a lot of South Soul stuff, South Soul Orchestra, Instant Funk, Got My Mind Made Up. He like Heart. I remember he had like the Heart, the Dreamboat Annie album. You know what I'm saying? So he went all over everywhere. So he was probably, one of my biggest musical influences in terms of no regard for a genre. If it was funky to him, he just with it, and that's what it was.
So with Pooh, for you not having that, like, was it just recreational or just an escape, or like what was your life plan?
It was an escape for me. I can put on music, had a bike, Walkman, just ride around town, endless hours, just listening to music. Had the auto reverse, so it would flip itself. And so, for me, it was just something I just always innately enjoyed and just enjoyed listening. I was always a writer, not necessarily of music, but like I would write poetry, I would write short stories. So that intrigued me in music. That's why I took to Nas like I did, because his rhymes are more like stories to me. So that's why I took the Prince. His stuff was like stories. And that was pretty much it. I later learned that my dad is a big music head and fan. But I didn't meet him till I was 19, so I would not have known that in my younger years.
Now, is this the typical narrative for a young black teenager in the early 90s to go this particular route? Because, again, how culturally ignorant Northerners are and what our thoughts are about anybody below the Mason-Dixon line. Just in general, because Outkast had this problem as well.
Yeah.
Like, people just say, Atlanta, whatever. Not knowing. So was there ever is this the typical route of a young black teenager in that time period?
I definitely wouldn't say it was typical, just because, where we grew up at, where I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, there were people who made music, but there wasn't really the thought of actually making it as a musician. It was just, we like music, we spin records, we freestyle, whatever. But I don't think there was ever a real thought of like, you could make a living doing this. The South at that time, and still in many ways, is still very traditional in the sense of, you go to school, you get a job, you get you some benefits, you bring a steady check home. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
right.
That was life.
That's what it was, yeah. So in terms of just musically, though, the South was always a big kind of melting pot, because, and I think a lot of things that people didn't understand, the problem that Cast had, and also, a problem that Little Brother had, people didn't understand it in the South. We grew up listening to everything. Like, the South was the meeting point for all kinds of music. So you had, of course, where we were, and I've talked about this before on the show, where we were in Greensboro, that was, it's the South, it's East Coast, but it was a lot of traffic that went through Greensboro, be it college students, be it drug dealers, be it, just all kind of transplants that was bringing their music, to our area. And then, like Pooh was saying, you had the cats coming from D.C., they brought the go-go, you know what I mean? And so we were getting, then you had Florida, that was, Magic Mike, 2 Live Crew, you had the bass, from Florida and Atlanta. And then, the West Coast, with like Chronic, of course, Chronic was kind of the bomb that went off everywhere, but we were students. And that was something that I think we always had an advantage of as Southerners, because we really had to study all types of music, versus New York, they kind of got caught off guard. Like, the South was a sucker punch to them. Like, when they saw, when Master P blew up and,
right.
No Limit, Cash Money, they got caught off guard. It was like, what the is this? But in the South, we knew that was coming. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because we had been studying it.